Hello and welcome to the North Star Podcast. This is Nick Ritter. In this episode, we begin our deep dive into the Eddic poem Völuspá, the prophecy of the Seeress, the first poem in the Poetic Edda and one of the major mythological poems of our religion. We begin by recounting the myth of the origin of poetry, told in the Prose Edda of Snorri Sturluson, how a war-ending truce was sealed by the birth of a god, how that god was murdered and his blood made into mead, and how that mead was stolen back for the gods. From there, we begin with the poem proper. As we discuss the many images and happenings in the poem, we delve into explorations of the concepts of örlög, identity and freedom, the connections between soul and breath, and the symbolic unity between trees and humanity. We hope you enjoy the conversation. One note. As you will hear during these conversations, or perhaps rather as you will notice by your inability to hear, we have experienced some technical difficulties with one of our microphones. We apologize for this, but we feel that what was gained through these discussions is still very worthwhile. Enjoy. Then spoke Ymir. Thiasse seems to me to have been very powerful. What was his origin? Bragi replied, his father was called Olwalde, and you will find what I have to say about him remarkable. He was very rich in gold, and when he died and his sons had to divide their inheritance, they measured out the gold when they divided it, by each in turn taking a mouthful, all of them the same number. One of them was Thiasse, the second Ide, the third Gangr. And we have now this expression among us to call gold the mouth-tail of these giants, and we conceal it in secret language or in poetry by calling it speech or words or talk of these giants. Then spoke Ymir, this seems to me to be a very good way to conceal it in secret language. And Ymir went on, how did this craft that you call poetry originate? Bragi replied, the origin of it was that the gods had a dispute with the people called Vanir, and they appointed a peace conference and made a truce by this procedure that both sides went up to a vat and spat their spittle into it. But when they dispersed, the gods kept this symbol of truce and decided not to let it be wasted, and out of it made a man. His name was Kvasir, and he was so wise that no one could ask him any question to which he did not know the answer. He traveled widely through the world teaching people knowledge, and when he arrived as a guest to some dwarfs, Fjalar and Galar, they called him to a private discussion with them and killed him. They poured his blood into 2 vats and a pot, and the latter was called Óþröðir, but the vats were called Son and Bodn. They mixed honey with the blood, and it turned into the mead, whoever drinks from which becomes a poet or scholar. The dwarfs told the Aesir that Kvasir had suffocated in intelligence because there was no one there educated enough to be able to ask him questions. Then these dwarfs invited to stay with them a giant called Gilling and his wife. Then the dwarfs invited Gilling to go out to sea in a boat with them. But as they went along the coast, the dwarfs rowed onto a shoal, and the boat capsized. Gilling could not swim and was drowned, but the dwarfs righted their boat and rowed to land. They told his wife what had happened, and she was greatly distressed and wept loudly. Then Fjalar asked her if it would be some consolation for her if she looked out to the sea where he had drowned, and she agreed. Then he told his brother Galar that he was to go up above the doorway she was going out of and drop a millstone on her head, and declared he was weary of her howling, and Galar did so. When Gilling's son Suttung found out about this, he went there and seized the dwarfs and took them out to sea and put them on a skerry below high water level. They begged Suttung for quarter, and offered to him as atonement and compensation for his father the precious mead, and they were reconciled on these terms. Suttung took the mead home with him and put it for safekeeping in a place called Hnitbjörg, setting his daughter Gunnlöð in charge of it. That is why we call poetry Kvasir's blood, or dwarf's drink, or the contents or some term for liquid of Óþröðir or Bodn or Son, or dwarf's transportation, because this mead brought them deliverance from the skerry, or Suttung's mead, or the liquid of Hnitbjörg. Then spoke Ægir, I think it is an obscure way to talk to call poetry by these names, but how did the Aesir get hold of Suttung's mead? Bragi replied, there is a story about it, that Odin set out from home and came to where 9 slaves were mowing hay. He asked if they would like him to hone their scythes. They said yes. Then he took a whetstone from his belt and honed, and they thought the scythes were cutting very much better and asked if they could buy the whetstone. The price he set on it was that he who wished to buy must give what was reasonable for it, and they all said they wanted to, and bade him to sell it to them, but he threw the whetstone up in the air, and when all tried to catch it, they dealt with each other in such a way that they all cut each other's throats with the scythes. Odin sought lodging for the night with a giant called Baugi, Suttung's brother. Baugi reckoned his economic affairs were going badly and said his 9 slaves had killed each other, and declared he did not know where he was going to get workmen from. Odin told him his name was Bolverk. He offered to take over the work of 9 men for Baugi and stipulated as his payment 1 drink of Suttung's mead. Baugi said he had no say in the disposal of the mead, said that Suttung wanted to have it all to himself, but he said he would go with Bolverk and try whether they could get the mead. Bolverk did the work of 9 men for Baugi during the summer, and when winter came he asked Baugi for his hire. Then they both set off. Baugi told his brother Suttung of his agreement with Bolverk, but Suttung flatly refused a single drop of the mead. Then Bolverk told Baugi that they would have to try some stratagems to see if they could get hold of the mead, and Baugi said that was a good idea. Then Bolverk got an augur called Rate, and instructed Baugi to bore a hole in the mountain if the augur would cut. He did so. Then Baugi said that the mountain was bored through, but Bolverk blew into the augur hole, and the bits flew back up at him. Then he realized that Baugi was trying to cheat him and told him to bore through the mountain. Baugi bored again, and when Bolverk blew a second time, the bits flew inwards. Then Bolverk turned himself into the form of a snake and crawled into the augur hole, and Baugi stabbed after him with the augur and missed him. Bolverk went to see where Gunnlod was, and lay with her for 3 nights, and then she let him drink 3 draughts of the mead. In the first draught he drank everything out of Odrörir, in the second out of Bolven, and in the third out of Son, and then he had all the mead. Then he turned himself into the form of an eagle, and flew as hard as he could. And when Suttung saw the eagle's flight, he got his own eagle shape, and flew after him. And when the Aesir saw Odin flying, they put their containers out into the courtyard, and when Odin came in over Asgard, he spat out the mead into the containers, but it was such a close thing for him that Suttung might have caught him, that he sent some of the mead out backwards, and this was disregarded. Anyone took it that wanted it, and it was what is called the rhymester's share. But Odin gave Suttung's mead to the Aesir, and to those people who are skilled in composing poetry. Thus we call poetry Odin's booty and find, and his drink and his gift and the Aesir's drink. So that was a section of the Gylfaginning from the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson that talks about the origin of poetry.
And what the gods had to go through to win it.
So, why is this important? Why are we talking about this?
Well, first of all, I suppose we're talking about it because we plan to talk about some poetry. So, simple enough, we're starting off by saying, here is a story about how poetry came into being and how much it was valued by the gods and what they did to get it, which you got to admit was a bit, yeah.
There was some work put into it.
There was some work put into it. There was some scheming put into it. There was a whole, a summer of working as a slave doing the work of 9 men?
Yeah, farm laborer.
That's, anyone who's done agricultural work, it's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think just a couple of words. Obviously, we can see that poetry is important. There's a lot more that we could say about that and a lot more that we will say in the future, I think. But it's important to note that poetry was considered to be no small thing for our ancestors. It wasn't just a matter of, some pretty words. It wasn't, Tumblr post poetry. It was actual, real, heady stuff that could change the way you thought. It could change things happening in your mind. It could change the world around you, and therefore was considered to be incredibly powerful. And what more do I want to say in that vein? I think one of the major things to basically, I think where we can put it is that poetry is a divine thing. And as the story that I just told shows, it comes to humans from a divine source and therefore needs to be understood by heathens as something divine.
I think also it's notable that it happens in a certain context that we're going to get into. So our first mythological poem we're going to look at is the Völuspá, which is the poem that tells about the beginning and end of the world, and it gives sort of the framework within which things happen in the world, right, from beginning to end. And one of the sort of major things that happen is the war between the Aesir and the Vanir. And when does poetry arise? Where does the Mead of Poetry come from? It comes from this incredibly interesting series of events after the end of that war. It comes in an important way out of the truce that came with that war's end between the Aesir and the Vanir. And it comes, yet at the same time, a truce came, but there was still violence, right? So we had a war. End of the war, the gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, spit into a vat. Vanir, I guess, with a couple of exceptions, go home. The gods are like, hey, let's do something with this stuff, and end up with a man. And that man, Kvasir, is very intelligent and wise. But we still don't have poetry. We just have super smart guy. Super smart guy gets killed by some dwarves, notably dwarves, people who make beautiful stuff, entities who make beautiful stuff. Whether we want to call them people or not depends on how you define people, I suppose. Entities who make beautiful stuff. That's what they do in the cosmos. The most beautiful and powerful items are made by dwarves. The dwarves take stuff from nature and they make it into useful stuff. Transform it into useful stuff. They find this guy, I don't know, I guess as just a smart dude, he wasn't very useful to them. They did something with him and made him into something, I guess, useful. But from that comes a whole bunch more violence, a whole cycle of violence here. There's dead giants, dead giantesses, dwarves being threatened. Ultimately, a bunch of thralls kill each other out of greed, I guess, which it's all just a whole cycle of violence that then ultimately leads somehow or another to most of the Mead of Poetry ending up with the gods, except for the stuff that goes backwards, which is interesting. In case you missed that reference, I'm pretty sure that means that's the stuff that comes out of
the rear end of an eagle.
The rear end of the eagle, who is Odin. That's the Odin's butt poetry mead.
I read, I forget the article, but it was kind of an exposition of the story and saying, like, they're literally saying that, whoever drank from that mead, their poetry is shit. That's literally what we're saying there.
There we go.
And the vomiting of the remainder of the mead into, vats and vessels, there seems to be a very strong, obviously there's a strong connection between poetry and poetic inspiration and alcohol in Germanic culture, but also between both alcohol and poetry with vomiting.
Yeah, or just it being strongly associated with liquid in general. I mean, it goes from a combination of God's spit to a person, and the idea of transformation too, and it taking on so many different forms to Kvasir, and then him being killed, and then his blood making mead.
Right. His blood mixed with honey, right?
Yeah.
So we bring in other elements there, right? Even the mead of inspiration is not just Kvasir. The mead of inspiration is Kvasir plus bee puke.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting that in many traditional cultures, alcohol is brewed. That before we had yeast cultures like we use now for brewing, he would use yours.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and
Yep.
enzymes to break down the starches to sugars, etc. And also, I think it's worth noting that in a lot of European cultures, honey was considered to be divine, right? Bees were considered to be intermediaries
Mhm.
between the human world and the divine.
Mhm.
So there's a whole lot going on in this imagery.
Mhm.
So where does that get us?
Well, I think where it gets us, as far as what we're going to do here, our plan is to start looking over some poetry, some mythological poetry. We did a couple of episodes where we talked about sort of very abstract stuff, and it's time for us to dig into, rather than the form of our religion, the content. And I think what's important to note is that at least the mental content of our religion is fundamentally poetic. Our mythology was handed down and is handed down in the form of poetry. The prose, like what we just read, was originally it's a summary of what was originally poetic. Unfortunately, we don't have an entire poem that tells us this whole story.
Yet.
But, well, we don't have an ancient entire poem that tells us this whole story. We do, however, have this prose rendition of this whole story. And we have poetic mentions of portions of this story, part of which will come up in the Völuspá that we're going to be getting into. I thought that we should start off, before we start getting into the poetry, by just reminding everybody where it all comes from. And where it all comes from is, all of that.
There we go. All right, so we have some source material that we want to look at. We have Neckel's edition of the Poetic Edda, and I think we have the Bellows translation, and the Hollander translation, in case we wanted to look at that. But Neckel's important because that's it's an Old Norse version, and it tells us which parts come from Codex Regius and which parts come from Hauksbok. There are two different versions of the Völuspá, and they have some different contents. They have some different material in there, so it's important to look at that. So yeah, shall we dive in?
Sure.
So I think the way we should do this is just kind of like that. We'll start some reading, but I don't think we're going to read the entire thing straight through. I think we'll go a few stanzas at a time and discuss what comes to mind. If this is acceptable to all,
It works for me.
all right. So the reading that we're going to do here will be the English translation, which we will primarily be using Bellows. We will supplement that in our discussions with things that probably mostly Ritter notices in the text, in the Norse text, because Nick Ritter's Old Norse is better than the rest of ours.
Oh, guys, come on.
Yeah, well. Yeah, okay. So, here we go. Hearing I ask from the holy races, from Heimdall's sons, both high and low. Thou wilt, Valfather, that well I relate old tales I remember of men long ago. I remember yet the giants of yore who gave me bread in the days gone by. 9 worlds I knew, the 9 in the tree, with mighty roots beneath the mold. Of old was the age when Ymir lived. Sea nor cool waves nor sand there were. Earth had not been, nor heaven above, but a yawning gap and grass nowhere. Then Bur's sons lifted the level land, Midgarth the mighty there they made. The sun from the south warmed the stones of earth, and green was the ground with growing leeks. The sun, the sister of the moon, from the south, her right hand cast over heaven's rim. No knowledge she had where her home should be, the moon knew not what might was his. The stars knew not where their stations were. Then sought the gods their assembly seats, the holy ones in council held. Names then gave they to noon and twilight, morning they named and the waning moon, night and evening, the years to number. At Ithavoll met the mighty gods, shrines and temples they timbered high, forges they set and they smithied ore, tongs they wrought and tools they fashioned. In their dwellings at peace they played at tables. Of gold no lack did the gods then know, till thither came up giant maids 3, huge of might, out of Jotunheim. I think that's a place to stop.
Okay.
So with a little cliffhanger there that everything seems to be good except.
Until it wasn't.
Yes. So we begin this thing with a call. Somebody is talking and wants everybody to listen. The holy races, Heimdall's sons, both high and low. This is, I think, most likely, I think, well agreed, although not completely agreed, to be a reference to the idea that we get in Rigsthula of Heimdall fathering children with, well, the ancestors of all the sort of estates of mankind, right? Of each of the sort of three social levels, we might say, of society.
Sure.
Then then Valfather is mentioned. That's, of course, a name for Odin.
That pretty much covers it. I think, one thing that interests me as a language geek is that the first word of the poem, hljóðs, is often translated as silence, but it literally means a kind of hearing, right? And it's cognate to other Indo-European words for things like fame. So slava in Slavic languages, kleos in Greek, and shravas in Sanskrit. So I don't know. I think it's interesting that that's the leading word there.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that going on to the second stanza, how Bel is translated as, those who gave me bread. The verb there is födda, which means to raise, but obviously is related to the word to feed, right? So the giants who raised me, the giants who fed me. Going on, I'm just scanning over it right now.
Well, maybe, as long as we're sort of getting into some textual things, if you're looking at different translations, you might see a weird thing where in this translation, we have 9 worlds I know, the 9 in the tree, right? Which makes sense with mighty roots beneath the mold. There are some that will say 9 worlds I knew, 9 ogresses or something. And this has to do with a textual variation in our manuscripts, right? Where it's what, Vithi versus Vidya or something.
So it's in this text, it's Iwede, and Iwithyor would be the ogresses.
Okay. And it seems to me, in general, that a principle of textual editing should be that when you're done editing the text, it should make sense.
Yeah, fair.
I think that we have to assume that, these old Norse guys, when they spoke, they did not speak nonsensically most of the time. I mean, I suppose it depends how much of the meat of inspiration they had just had. But generally, they're going to say things that make sense. If we have a stanza here where it says 9 worlds I know, 9 ogresses, these things don't really go together well.
No, and if you look at the following line there, so in the Norse, Neomanakeima, I remember 9 worlds or 9 lands. Neoiweve, 9 in the tree. The next line, mjot with maran. So the meeting tree famous. So you have that word, with wood repeated. It doesn't make sense if those are ogresses.
We would expect each half line here to sort of amplify or at least relate to the meaning of the previous. With that sort of through line of wood-related words that you're talking about, it makes sense.
Yeah.
With this strange alternate version where you've got ogresses popping in, it doesn't.
It
just
breaks the continuity.
Summarizing, I think, what you had said.
Yeah. It doesn't fit very well. Although, I'm going to say it, a lot of theories come out of academia that are mostly meant for the purpose of writing academic articles, right?
Sure.
So
sure. Yep. Especially, if you don't get a PhD unless you do something new, right?
Yeah.
Which I suppose if everything that's been done before is already right, means you got to do something wrong. I don't know.
I guess. I mean, what? These poems have been looked at for centuries now.
Yeah. And obviously that's a bit of a caricature of the situation.
Of course.
But still, it often
doesn't mean it's not true.
The search for the novel leads us to novel errors rather than novel truths.
So I think I have I don't know, it's going to probably continually be a pretty weird esoteric reading of this, but I kind of get this first part as like formless becoming form.
Oh, yeah.
And like this as we kind of get into this, will kind of be like describing cycles this being birth and like ending in the war being death. You know, you talk about things not having names and then, you know, getting names. And the world kind of just coming into focus, into being.
That actually sparked a really interesting thought. This is not the only Germanic poem that covers the end of the world. The other main one that I can think of is an old High German poem called Muspille. It's a Christian poem. It's set in a Christian context, but it feels like, you know, especially with the name and which comes from a mention in the poem, that there is some older Germanic mythological content there. And that poem starts off as a discussion of the fate of the soul after death and then goes on to the end of the world. So I think that's actually a really insightful connection you're making.
And I mean, it also ends with Balder being reborn too. So it's like a reinvigoration of the cycle.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that with the idea there of formlessness, I think the Bella's translation has it as the yawning gap. This is, you know, Ginnungagap. The literal line in the Old Norse is gap var ginnunga, and that can mean a couple of different things. The verb ginna doesn't directly mean to yawn. It means to deceive. So it is the deceptive gap, or there's something else going on there that's more mental. I think that describing it as a yawning gap is certainly correct, but it's almost the gap of some sort of, I don't know, psychological or mental activity, whether it's deception. You know, we have you know, Gindrunar as a thing that shows up. It doesn't just mean to deceive, and I wish I had like Cleesby Vigfusson here in front of me, but there's more going on in just that little half line than most translators talk about.
So if I'm remembering correctly, I think Jan de Vries is the one who has it originally as having something to do with like magically charged or something, right? Magic is a confusing word, but I would say probably something more like charged with potentiality or something, right? Something that out of which many things can arise, and that has sort of the power to make those things. No, well, potential. We'll stick with potential because otherwise it can get confusing. But so it's yawning does seem odd, right? Yeah. But remember too, in the Prose Edda, what's the one section called? The deluding of Gylfi, right?
Gylfaginning. Yeah, that's exactly,
So there is, now I suppose those strange people who want to combine what we do with Vedanta might point to Maya here, right?
I thought of it, I don't know, that's interesting.
Strange people, yes.
Maya, there's interesting cognates with the word magic too, and matter as well.
But the idea then that what we think of as reality in a sense is also in a way a deception. I'm going to let that sit because I'm not sure I buy it, but it's an interesting thought that's something going on here too.
Yeah, it's something I thought of for sure. And I also love the kind of inherent paradox of a yawning gap. Like it's like hinting at nothing and like, but again, to potentiality and like,
Well, we know from the account in the Prose Edda that everything comes out of that gap, right?
Right.
Once
it's like the Big Bang kind of
place where things come together and all the stuff comes out, like the Big Bang, like that singularity or whatever in our current only semi-coherent creation myth.
Yes.
All right.
I think also to your point earlier, you know, the formlessness turning into something that is formed. You have the creation that happens, like a burst of creation, and then there is an ordering that happens of those created items.
The sun knows not what might she had, right? They don't know what they're supposed to do. Let's see.
Solvarp sunnan sin nimana. So the sun literally threw her hand on high from the south, right?
I'm sorry, it was the moon that knew not what might he had. I'm sorry.
Yes,
but
yes, true. But yeah, you're right though. The sun didn't know where her place was. The stars didn't know where their places were. The moon, you know, ostensibly still doesn't know where his place is because he's wandering all the time. But he didn't know his power, etc. So the gods, this is a good place to get into this. They went to their council seats, which apparently already existed, and chatted about it. That's how I'm going to translate Okum Thatgattusk. And they gave names to all of the different times, which I think calls those things into being. That's an important mythological element there. To name something is to create it. And it's interesting to me that, all of these different times of day are their arom atelia, to tally the years.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, first of all, let's back up for a sec. Let's think about sort of the order that things with intelligence, let's say, appear in this. So the first stanza is referring not to the story, but to what's there, right? So we'll leave the first stanza out for a second.
Mm-hmm.
But then we get to, I remember yet. So giants show up first.
Yep.
Which goes with the creation story in the Prose Edda, right? Where the first thing was Ymir. And then we're talking about 9 worlds and stuff. Then specifically Ymir. Of old was the age when Ymir lived. So giants first still, and at some early time, the narrator, the vulva, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who remembers being brought up by those giants.
Yep.
So you got Ymir, then Bur's sons. So this is our first mention of, gods.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about this poetry is that it doesn't give the full story. It alludes to stories.
Yeah.
So Bur's sons, as we know from the Prose Edda, are Odin, Vili, and Ve. So Odin and his 2 brothers, and they form the world from the body of Ymir. And so Bur's sons lifted the level land, Midgard the mighty, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got 3 gods, one of whom we encounter much of, and the other 2 of whom we don't encounter much of, right? At that point, we get the sun and the moon, which elsewhere are described as being gods.
Gods, yeah.
The sun and the moon don't quite know what they're supposed to do. And then the gods are there. Now, we don't have an account of where they all came from. Here in the Prose Edda, I think there's a bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's where we are. And then comes this important thing, right? Names and time.
Yeah.
Right? The gods come together. They do whatever it is that you do in your assembly seats, which I assume is sit around and talk, and hold council. And they give names to noon, to twilight, to morning, the waning moon, night and evening, in order to number the years. So now we have time as a thing to be thought of, a thing that is measurable, a thing that matters. This is, and that to me, here is the beginning of when time matters, right? This is where time sort of enters the picture in a way.
Sure.
What's happening before this is in illo tempore, it's all in illo tempore, but it's definitely outside of normal time. Here, at least the concept of time is brought in. You can start counting years from here.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me about this myth in comparison to other creation myths of other religions is that the gods don't start everything, right? They come into being when things have already gotten started, and they change what they find to what we're familiar with.
Yep.
And so they can be thought of as the originators of that, but there were already forces in motion when the gods came to be. And I think that that's an important point in our religion.
Well, a lot of religions seem to begin with something already existing that the gods do something with, right? Even, I think, on certain readings, even the ex nihilo creation myth that we've all been raised with, nonetheless starts off with waters or whatever being there to begin with.
Yeah.
So that there's always this tension where there's creation, but creation seems to be a shaping more than a bringing into being.
Yeah, like the world as a character or a self in and of itself that just has these kind of things within it. Yeah, as you were saying that, I honestly kind of was like, what if the narrator, like theoretically, was like kind of the world, like in this telling its own history and like
you actually get I think it's in Wagner. Correct me if I'm wrong, and we can edit this part out if I'm totally off base here. But the Vola is actually Erda,
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, obviously, Faulkner is not our ancient poets, but, poetry even has power in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Even some might say today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's actually a really interesting thought.
If you can find people today who make poetry that didn't come out of the bird's butt, yes.
And this is kind of me because I've been listening to a lot about Hinduism, and it's kind of just when we're talking about the universe and stuff like that, it kind of reminds me of Brahman, like the the universal self, and it's when we're talking about universe coming into being, like the first worldly self, and then like we're talking about gods, just kind of other life forms being contained therein. Like,
sure.
I don't know, I'm just finding a lot of like parallels and stuff like that.
And certainly certainly Vedic religion is close. Well, is related at its root to this.
Especially, and that the world was, and then, there's life within it kind of thing. Like God didn't create the world.
Well, and indeed you have a similar story of a giant figure, right? Purusha, who is slain by the gods, and the world and the various social classes, in this case, are made out of his remains.
Yeah. You also have a similar myth of the theft of a sacred drink by someone in the form of an eagle, right?
Yeah.
The theft of Somar by Garuda, who is actually just an eagle, not just an eagle, but like a divine eagle, but doesn't have another shape.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of parallel stuff there. So, and I suppose we can make another parallel, right? Here we are. Here's the old days. This is back. Everything is great. And they have no lack of gold, right?
Yeah.
Because it is the golden age. Who are they? They are apparently the gods dwelling at peace in this world that they have shaped, in this time that they have given shape to as well, and have given names to the parts of the day and parts of the month, the waning moon, etc., so that they can count the years spent making stuff and being happy, apparently. And so if we stop halfway through 8 here, of gold no lack to the gods then know. Everything seems real nice, and you do kind of wonder, though, what use is counting the years? Why count the years? Nothing's going on. We're just hanging out being happy, right? But fortunately, there might be a reason. Till thither came up giant maids 3, huge of might, out of Jotunheim. Then sought the gods their assembly seats. They do a lot of that. The holy ones and council held to find out who should raise the race of dwarfs out of Brimir's blood and the legs of Balin. So, and then comes this list of dwarfs. So we have, again, we were talking about where do things come from. We had giants to begin with. Now we've got these 3 maids, giant maids, who are, I think, are considered by most to probably be the Norns, right?
Yep. I've never heard a different theory.
Right. It's not specifically said, but they certainly are, because by 20 it is specifically they're named. But we have this lengthy thing, the list of dwarves, and we've talked about this, me and Nick Ritter here, about how the list of dwarves is often by editors and translators sort of put into a footnote or cut out because people think that it's not important somehow.
Well, there is an odd sort of, and maybe it's only odd for us looking at it from our perspective, but there's a question that's always come to my mind. What do these 3 giant maidens have to do with dwarves? What do the dwarves have to do with the narrative and the story here? And I haven't answered that question to my own satisfaction.
Right.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of is it the Iliad or the Odyssey, where there's just that list of ships and like all the families that own each of the ships or whatever, and they're like just like kind of just like a
Yeah.
Well, and it was
literally bullet points, basically.
That list of ships was super important, right? So that the fact that Athens had a ship in there, the Athenians were accused of faking it, of having edited the poem to stick themselves in there when they weren't really there, right?
Yeah, but as you're reading it, it's like, and I'm sure like at the time, this is the similar, like, where those names mattered contextually when this poem was.
And I think that, if you look at some of the names, it almost seems like some of that, the naming as creation is going on still, right?
Sure.
Especially you start in with like Nye och Nede, Nortre och Södre, Austre och Westre. You have, if I'm remembering correctly, Nye is the new moon, Nede is the full moon, Nortre och Södre are north and south, Austria, Equestria are east and west. So
Well, it's curious, right? Assuming the accuracy of this translation, the gods met to find out who should raise the race of dwarves out of Brimir's blood.
yeah, so
And Brimir is Ymir, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't say who they decided to do it unless I missed something here.
No,
Yeah.
so you have Hver skulle dverga drotin skepja. So there's two ways of translating that. Who should of the dwarves the Lord shape, the drotin, or it's potentially Hver skulle dverga drot skepja. Who should shape the troop of the dwarves, right? I tend to go with the latter reading because it makes more sense in context.
It does.
Or Brimis blode, out of Brimir's blood, or Blaen's legium, literally out of Blaen's legs, but I think limbs are, the parts of his body. And there's a mention of this fellow called Botsogner, who is already mentioned as a dwarf. Manstrumor and Dwerga Aldra and Durin Annar. So Motsogner and Durin seem to be there at the beginning, but it's saying that they
So they're the ones who did it.
are the ones who shaped, made, prepared Gera, the dwarves, many of the dwarves from the earth, as Durin said. So
like the gods made Motsognir and Durin, and then they made the rest?
that's kind of what I'm getting out of this.
Okay.
It's interesting that Motsognir is mentioned as the mightiest, but that's the last time we hear about him too.
Yeah.
Huh.
That is true. Either in here or in Tolkien. One or the other.
Well, a fair number of these dwarves are mentioned in Tolkien, yes.
And not always as dwarves.
No.
Again, though,
I don't recall if it shows up as a byname for Odin. We'll have to look at the Grimnismach at some point. Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, then you're right.
By name for Odin. Okay.
By name for Odin. You also have some others in there as well.
Mhm.
And I'll find some as I'm looking through here.
It feels like this would make a ton more sense too if it was performed and sung. Like these names.
Okay, I can do that.
Oh.
Yeah, I just contextually too. Like, I don't know, and I can see it being kind of almost acted out
And
too, along with it.
It actually becomes very, very rhythmic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So like stanza 16, Alvro och Yngve, elf and Yngve, which we take to be the name of a god.
Mm-hmm.
So what does this tell us? What's happening here?
Well, and Alf is clearly elf, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of names in here that contain elf, right? Alf, Gandalf, Vindalf, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of elf names for this list of dwarf names.
Well, especially at the beginning, you are not at the beginning, but you have names of corpses or words for corpse, I should say, as well, which that's another weird thing going on.
So there are a few things that we might think at this point. So I'm although we started off going like stanza by stanza, I don't know that we want to read the whole catalog of dwarf names here.
No.
Even as I was starting a bit of an argument that we should not neglect them as they often are. Here we're going to neglect them anyway. We're a terrible bunch of hypocrites.
Yes,
very sorry.
It's a confusing part of the poem.
It is, and the confusion maybe it's because maybe it is an interpolation. Maybe it's an interpolation from something else. For all I know, right? Maybe 10. Right, so 10. There was Motsognir, the mightiest made of all the dwarfs, and Durin next. Many a likeness of men they made, the dwarfs in the earth, as Durin said. Maybe after that, then this whole list could very well not have been a part of this and have come from somewhere else. Was it a list of just dwarfs? Was it a list generally of names of weird things that are out there? I don't know, right? Because the elf names are certainly different.
Yeah.
And as you say, they seem to come from a lot of different directions. There are names that are, points on the compass, sort of names that are basic parts of the form of the world.
Mm-hmm.
There are names that are corpses.
Yeah.
There are names that are people who do spooky stuff, right? Gandalf, that's a spooky guy, right?
There's even a name of an object here, Draupnir, that shows up elsewhere as like the armoring of Odin.
Right, that drops rings, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's a very strange list. It's interesting, and it's certainly worth studying. I mean, but it's hard to know exactly what to do with it. But we do, if we just place it in some kind of context. What has happened so far is everything was going great for the gods. They're living in some kind of a golden age. And all of a sudden, 3 giantesses come. Then we switch over to then the gods are thinking about who should make dwarfs.
Yeah. And why?
Now, could there be an ordering problem here? We know that stanzas often end up getting moved around in these poems.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be that the gods were hanging out, doing their thing? So let's say back around, they're making tongs, they're making tools. Then they think, hey, who's going to make the dwarves out of this whole like mess that's left over from Ymir?
Mm-hmm.
Which is what it amounts to, right?
Right.
They figure that out. Then everybody is dwelling in peace, playing games, having no lack of gold. Then all of a sudden come those 3 women from Jotunheim. Then we get past all of this dwarf name list stuff. We discover that that's a list of all the forebears of Lofar. And then from the throng did 3 come forth. So it really feels like that's been shoved in the middle of 3 women come. Oh, yeah, here's this dwarf stuff. 3 women came. It feels like it's been moved around.
Actually, though, I think that it's not 3 women in the second one. Because,
no, you're right. That's not. Sorry,
right.
I was just not going far enough into the stanza.
So
that's Odin and Heither and Lothar.
Right. And you can tell in the Norse because the form of the adjective is different.
Okay.
With the gender. So
sure.
In 8, it's uns thriar quomo,
mm-hmm.
and here it's uns thrir quomo. So it's feminine versus masculine.
Sure. So, okay. But we do get then a couple stanzas further on, thence come the maidens, mighty in wisdom,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So, and that's got to be those 3 from Jotunheim, although it doesn't say they came from Jotunheim. They came from the dwelling down neath the tree.
Yeah. Actually, I'd like to read 17 and 18 in Norse because it is lovely. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the poem.
All right.
So it goes, Uns thrir quomo or thwi levi ovlger og astger Aesir at huse, fundo a lande lit megande askok emblo örloch lausa. Und thane atto, thane hovdo, lane lätine litogoda, und gaf Odin, gaf Hönir, gaf Lothar og litogoda. And there's a lot going on there, right? They found, how would we translate this? Lit megande, able to do little,
mm-hmm.
of little might.
Empty of might is the translation here.
Sure.
It's pretty close, but little is not quite empty.
Right.
Yeah.
And then örlochlausa. So, we could translate örloch as fate. It usually is translated as something like fate, but they don't have any. They're örlogless. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting idea, right? Urlog. What is Urlog? So anybody who has read, let's say, The Well in the Tree, knows that Urlog is extremely important, that there is this sense of how time works in Germanic thought that has basically the past being layers that have been set down, and that's what Urlog is, right? It's the is old, primeval, whatever, and the Loch is those layers. Now, it often gets translated as fate, but there's a strange thing there. We often think of fate as like somebody decided something's going to happen in the future and it will be like this. Urlog is fate not because somebody decided things are going to happen in the future and they are like this, but because the things that have happened or been done in the past necessarily lead to that future. You can think of it in terms of causation, but it's a very strong sort of causation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a fate that comes from rootedness. It is a future that comes from the existence of a past. So what don't they have here? What is it to be Urlogless? Is it or Urloglos, right? I'll say it right.
Urlochlaus.
Urlochlaus. There we go. Thank you. You've got the text in front of you. I have the cover of a book in front of me. To be Urlochlaus is to be without the past.
Yeah.
It's to be disrooted. What's the fancy word people use? Deracinated, right? Pulled up from the roots. It's to be without context,
Yeah.
without roots.
I think that image is actually implicit in the poem here, because Askokemblo, these are names of trees.
Yeah.
An ash, and scholars are divided. Is it an elm? Is it a vine? Something like that. But they're laying there, right? What happens to rootless trees? They lay there. They fall
there. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Isn't there
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if that comes out of the prose Edda. We could look at that.
Yeah, it might.
Because that's always the image that comes into my head too. Yeah.
So let's think about this. Let's move away, I suppose, from just the poem to some kind of cultural criticism, because why not? If the sort of critics of modernity are correct, and I believe they are, at least the ones who I read, the main criticism of the way that people live today is rootlessness, right? The idea is that, the ideal that is pushed on us really by consumerist or capitalist culture, is that we should be rootless, because then we constantly have some kind of a hole that needs to be filled in our being, and we can do that by shopping at Amazon or whatever, right? Get online and order some more stuff, and that will fill that hole. Never really quite does, but then that means we get to buy more still. And so it feeds the capitalist machine, and we remain unsatisfied and unfed. I think that's related somehow. So our account here in the Völuspá of the beginning of humanity is that the gods found these trees laying on land, so certainly rootless, and they were without orlog, and the gods saw that as a situation needing rectification, and apparently they fixed it. Now we've come to a point in our existence where we are apparently no longer interested in that fix, or some of us aren't. And so we have created a whole society around the idea of rootlessness as ideal, of cutting ourselves off from our roots to create a new kind of person who is really not fully a person any more than those logs found like the gods were fully a person. No one is a person without a past, right? If you are without
context,
then you're just really not.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack from there. I think that one of the things that comes to my head, and I'll try to avoid going off on too long of a tangent here, is that kind of rootlessness as ideal that we can talk about is usually pushed under the rubric of freedom, right?
Right.
So that, you're free to be who you are, regardless of, where you come from, who your parents were, etc., which is a radically different notion of what freedom means than it did in the culture of our ancestors. And again, I don't want to dive too deeply, but if you look at what words like Anglo-Saxon freo means, it doesn't have ultimately to do with lack of bonds. It has to do with belonging. So the kind of freedom that's being touted as, maybe a cover for the horror of rootlessness is actually an anti-freedom, if we want to look at it in the terms of, words meaning what they meant originally, a non-belonging.
Right.
Isolation, yeah.
Yeah.
It's that kind. So the freedom is a lack of bonds. So it's one thing to be free to become who you are, right? To use that fun little phrase from Pindar, right? Become who you are. But that implies that there's something which is who you are.
Yeah.
When you remove context, it's hard to tell exactly what that who you are is or is supposed to be. Your having an identity, I think, has to be in, I don't want to say opposition, but certainly your identity exists because, not just because you can say things about who you are, but also because those things exclude you from being someone else.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You need a context to have an identity. You need others to be an individual.
Yeah, the one implies the other. To develop a self is a social function. Like you're developing yourself amongst others. So like the very foundation of the self is, I mean, they kind of have this in science now too. Like you are who you spend the most time around, the 5 most people you spend your time around or whatever. It's, and your parents obviously is more literal, kind of nature based, but it's still very nurture based as well, where you're taking on the traits of others. And so, and if you have like a person that's like, those feral children or whatever, they don't have personalities. Like it's weird, kind of gross comparison. But
yeah. Well, I mean, depending. I even then, I suppose those feral children out there being raised by wolves or whatever are defining themselves in opposition to what the other wolves are doing.
I suppose, yeah, exactly, yeah,
sure. Yeah, there was a thought that came up. I'm reaching for it again. Oh yeah, so this notion that you can be something at all without a context that you come from that roots you completely does away with the idea of authenticity, right? If authenticity is important, then rootedness is important. Then belonging in a context is important.
Now, I do think there are people who would say that authenticity is some kind of a false thing or a thing that we shouldn't seek. I think those people are foolish, but those people certainly exist.
Yeah.
And authenticity as, being what is most appropriate for you to be, right? Authenticity is always your authenticity, is to me extremely important. And again, what makes that? It's that orlog, right? It is what has happened in the past that made you, what is there in the deepest parts of your being, which is to say, what is there in what was primordially set there by people's actions or by the way the world works or by the gods, whatever. That's who you are in the most fundamental sense. There are other things that you can put on top of that, other things that are on top of that. The struggle in life is probably the struggle to sort of pare back the inappropriate things that have been put over that, right? The things that conflict with who you really are. At least that's my idea of what the struggle is. I suppose other people would have different ideas. Some people probably want to repudiate who and what they are for whatever reason. They've been taught it's bad, right? Or they've bought into the idea that there's something immoral about authenticity, that who they are, they need to get rid of that to be, I don't know, part of the mass or something, right? Or a good interchangeable economic unit or whatever it is that we're all supposed to be in this world.
Right.
I will resist that. I am not a good interchangeable economic unit. I'm a very bad one.
Yes.
I buy weird stuff.
Difficult to interchange. So going on to the next stanza, says I'm freely translating here, but they didn't have breath. They didn't have woad, heightened mental state, we could call that. They didn't have, it's always hard to translate these words, la, ne, lat, ne, litogola. What does your translation say?
This is where I think my translation falls fairly short. Soul they had not. Sense they had not. That's woad. Other is what he's translating as sense.
Yep.
I don't get that. Heat nor motion nor goodly hue.
Okay. Yeah. I think that part's good.
Yeah.
Litogola, lito or lit. Also the name of a dwarf. Let's go back to that. Right. That's also the name of a dwarf. That's like appearance. Like it's the same root that you have in the German word antlitz, meaning face.
Okay.
Or Anglo-Saxon wlita.
So then we get soul gave Odin. And soul is what you were saying, breath. So ond.
Yeah, ond.
Okay.
Which I do think that there is again, not to get too linguistic punny, but there is a spiritual sense of that word. Right. Yep. It is breath, but is breath in the same sense as spirit is breath.
Yeah.
I buy that. And I mean, breath is soul in a lot of.
Yeah. Atman in Sanskrit.
No. So sense gave Hener, and that's Other. Heat gave Lothar and goodly hue. It's like no one gave motion, so I guess we're stuck.
Yeah. Well, we are sitting here sedentary while talking. So this always interested me too. So it always struck me as a little a little weird that Odin, the god who's named for Ur, did not give Ur to humans. He gave Ond, he gave breath or soul or what have you. And the one who gave Oath was Hönir. So what do we know about Hönir? I think this shows up in the Gylfaginning in the Prose Edda of what happened after that war, after the hostages were exchanged between the Aesir and the Vanir. Mm-hmm. Hönir was one of those hostages, and so long as Mimir was present, he was able to give good counsel. Everyone loved him. He was beautiful. But the Vanir noticed that if Mimir wasn't there, he would just say, let others decide. Mm-hmm. And kind of the thought that I formed from that and this stanza right here is that he can't decide on his own because he doesn't have Older anymore because he gave it to us.
Mm. So does that mean Odin doesn't have Ond anymore?
That's an interesting thing too, because if you look at the gods who die, mm-hmm. Odin's the first, right? Mm-hmm. And how does he die? He dies from hanging. So traumatic strangulation of the breath. And I don't know if there's a connection, but it's something that sparks my imagination.
Yeah, it's interesting. Huh. Is that in the Prose Edda, or is that in, what is it? In the
it's in
Heimskringla.
The hanging?
No, Mimir and Hönir.
I think that's in the Prose Edda. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Or maybe there's, for some reason, I have some vague memory of it also being in Heimskringla, but I might be confusing myself.
I can look it up.
And in the first section with the euhemerized gods doing their euhemerized thing.
Sure. Yeah, we can verify that before we post this.
Yeah. I also really like the just kind of simple like dual nature of breath and soul as it like the inner and the outer. Kind of like you breathing in and breathing out, and like that interplay of the soul kind of being with you and the world that you're interacting with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting to think of the soul as breath, because breath isn't something that just sits in you.
Yeah.
Whereas the way that we have come to think of soul is something that just sits in you.
It's self-contained, and it's very individualistic.
It's like the homunculus in your brain, right?
Yeah.
And this is another interesting thing that I can't believe I didn't think of until you made that comment right now. But if you look at all sorts of, like, I don't know if you want to call them like psycho-spiritual practices around the world, one thing that a lot of them have in common is the importance of breath, right? Yep. If you're looking at yoga, if you're looking at any sort of meditation, if you're looking at Qigong, breath is central to everything that you're doing.
And how much it because of how much it controls the whole psychosomatic system, really. Like, I mean, you really can transform your state of being pretty drastically by breath alone.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Okay, so moving on, and this is a good example, I think, of a good way of linking concepts poetically. So in 17, you have Askokemblo Örlochlausa, and then in the beginning of 19, you have Askvetik Standa. So you have the ash showing up as a repeated thing again, and there's an implicit connection there, I think, between the ash Yggdrasil and the first man. And Ask.
So okay, what do you? Well, let's read the stanza, then we can go on there, right? In ash I know, Yggdrasil its name, with water white is the great tree wet. Thence come the dews that fall in the dales, green by Urth's well does it ever grow. So this is the tree, we assume the same tree mentioned earlier with the 9 worlds in it, and it's an ash.
Yeah.
So how do you take that? What would you put in that connection? You say there's a connection between that ash and our ancestor, Oscar, right? Ash.
So what do we know about ash trees? They're very upright. The wood is very straight grained. It was used for the making of spear shafts and arrows, which is interesting in and of itself because it is used as a kenning for men. Right. And I think that I'll have to look this up and make sure that I'm correct here. But I think words for spear can also be used as kennings for men. And I don't know. I'm not sure where to go with it. There's it seems like a murky sort of thing. There's something mysterious going on there. But the first idea that comes to mind is we were talking about Ymir before, and you mentioned Purusha, and a big thing having to do with kind of the idea that shows up in different religions that are all in this one family of the creation of the world from the sacrifice and partition of some giant, is that you have one-to-one connections, right? You have connections between, the eyes and the sun and the moon, between, the hair and the trees, between the bones and stones, between the flesh and the earth itself, and between breath and wind, right? And I think that there are...
Don't forget brains and clouds.
Brains and clouds, absolutely, very important. And I think that there's another sense here by which the tree, if it bears the same name as the first man, is also kind of maybe an image of the human,
Okay.
right? Or the human is an image of the tree. So that we're looking at the cosmos as both a tree and as the what am I trying to say? What's the correct word here? The cut apart remains, the dismembered remains of a giant. Right? And maybe these are two ways of thinking about the same thing. And if the form of the giant is also the form of the human, and the elements of the giant, which are also elements of the world, are also found in the elements of the human, then maybe the ash tree is also an image of the human.
I certainly buy that. The ash tree is the image of the human, and the fact that ash trees are often used, ash is often used as a kenning for human, I think really backs that. And generally, I think tree language is often used for people.
Yeah.
Trees of battle,
Yeah.
It's
spear trees.
Spear trees. So yeah, there's definitely a connection there. I buy that. If we start thinking mystically or whatever, we can start thinking that there's sort of a microcosm, macrocosm thing going on here. That the man and the universe and the man. The curious part here, to me, we of course don't have a myth for where the heck the tree came from.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't, we have the gods forming the world out of the remains of Ymir, described in some detail in the Prose Edda. Nowhere, though, does it then say, and then a tree grew out of his belly button or something, right? I'm just coming up with the belly button thing right now. Do not make too much out of that.
That is not a new myth.
Yes, no new myth here. We have nothing like that. And yet here it is. It is interesting to me also to think in terms of living versus dead. From, earliest times, Ymir and Auðumla arise. Auðumla licks a god or an ancestor of a god out of a block of ice, right? Ice, not really alive. Ancestor, we kind of hope he's alive. Otherwise, that's a weird ancestry to have. The universe, right? We have Ymir, came out of stuff, was alive, running around doing the Ymir thing, which maybe has to do with roaring, right? Gets killed by descendants of the guy licked out of the block of ice, is dead, is made into the world. Then we have another image of the world where the world is a tree, which is alive. Out of that dead body come dwarves, who I believe we have to think of as alive.
Even though some of them are called corpse. Yes.
Yeah, even though some of them have corpse names. So, yeah, this, I don't know.
Well, and I was just going to say that, it kind of reminds me of just a stanza ago when humans were found without fate, and we were talking about fate being like essentially history, and it kind of reminded me of roots of a tree, and like tree kind of being ancestors themselves. So like the first ancestor being a tree is like the very start of an ancestral tree that keeps like spidering out. I kind of
that's a really good point. And I think that there's also mythological images, especially in Germanic mythology, come in threes, and I'm having this image here where we have the yawning gap or the deceptive gap being the space empty of anything but potential. Then we have Ymir as kind of a solidified everything, kind of potential all locked up in one thing, and then we have the image of the tree, which is the structure of the potential as it plays out. So I think that what I'm seeing here is those three things, Ginnungagap, Ymir, and Yggdrasil, overlaid on top of each other, each having to do with the same everything in some sense, but in different forms or different stages of potentiality.
Okay.
Yeah, when you just brought back up Ginnungagap, that actually, when we were kind of asking about where'd the tree come from, that kind of all of a sudden sparked an answer, like, of that potentiality. Like, it's potentiality, some form and more potentiality, and then form in the form of the tree.
Yep.
I guess where I kind of get confused though is that in the very beginning of this poem where it talks about the 9 worlds that are in and around the tree, aren't 2 of those worlds the realms of fire and ice that were there in existence with Ginnungagap?
Sure.
So I guess it's always kind of confused me.
Yeah. So I think there are 2 ways you can think about that, right? The tree grows into them, right?
Mm.
The other way to think about that is myths often are not particularly rational.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, it's like if you ever try, you know, there are all these lovely drawings or whatever of, you know, the Norse cosmos, and some of them are very pretty, some of them not so much, and they always look pretty good until you start really looking at the details and realize, yeah, actually this doesn't quite work based on what's said here or here or here, right? It's, if, you know, where does this stuff come from, right? It comes somehow or another out of our, well, I'll use Jungian language instead of Freudian, out of our unconscious, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not exactly a Jungian, but I think there's a lot to that yes, indeed, we have this sort of common set of symbols and whatever that's deep within the strata of our mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's our urlog. I don't know. And these come out in poetry.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes just like the dreams and stuff that also comes out of this same source, they don't make a lot of sense, except that they do, right? Maybe I can't map it, but I have a feeling for what's going on. Maybe, you know, I have dreams where there are people there and it's a guy right by me, and even though I'm looking straight at him, I can't identify him, and I couldn't tell you what he looked like. And it doesn't even seem weird that that's the way it is, right? Stuff strange in dreams.
Or rational language is not equipped to talk about the meanings that we find in dreams or mythology.
Oh, yeah, that too. Right.
I like that it came out of it, the first explanation you kind of laid out. But I think there is part of it that can't kind of contain it. But if you think about, Alan Watts talks about this, I'm going through a book of his where he's like, if the Big Bang isn't something that just happened, it's kind of continuing to happen. It's an ongoing developing thing. So like, of course it would have a connection to the world tree. It's like, because it's, or the Ginnungagap rather, the world tree would have a connection to Ginnungagap and those 2 worlds, because it's, that initial potentiality moment is still a now thing. Like everything developing now is a continuation of it.
Yeah. So again, you could think of you know, those 3 images of the whole as 3 stages in one continuing process.
Yeah.
Void to giant to tree.
Yeah.
Or maybe the tree was always there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, and there are lots of ways that, you know, we could make this conversation much less interesting. Well, maybe there were just different concepts from different people who didn't think the same thing. Yeah.
The tree only became a tree when there were gods to name it and identify it as a tree.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, giving it.
That's that one. That's certainly the most poetic one.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the North Star Podcast. For more information about us, visit Axenthof.com. That is AXENTHOF.com. In our next episode, to be published on August 12th, we will continue our conversation of the poem Völuspá.